The room was calm. Too calm. Soft wooden floors. Framed martial arts photos lining the walls. A quiet private training hall where only a few invited guests had gathered that evening. No cameras. No media. Just discipline, respect, and silence. Steven Seagal stood near the center of the hall, dressed simply in black. Relaxed posture. Calm face. The kind of calm that comes from years of confidence, not arrogance. He had been invited to observe a small exhibition, nothing dramatic, nothing public. At least, that's what everyone thought. Then the door opened. No announcement. No introduction. A man walked in quietly, wearing plain training clothes. Slim frame. Relaxed shoulders. His steps were light, almost soundless. At first, no one paid attention. Until Steven looked up. Their eyes met. The temperature in the room changed. Steven didn't know why, but something felt different. The chatter died down. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few people straightened their posture without realizing it. The man stopped a few steps inside the hall. Someone whispered, barely audible. "That can't be him." Steven narrowed his eyes, studying the stranger's stance. There was no tension in him. No challenge. No attempt to dominate the room. Yet somehow, his presence filled the space more than anyone else's. Another whisper followed. "It's Bruce Lee." The words spread slowly, like electricity moving through the air. Steven remained still. He had heard the stories. Everyone had. Speed. Precision. Philosophy. A man who didn't just fight, but understood movement. Bruce Lee didn't smile. He didn't bow. He didn't speak. He simply stood there. Steven felt something unusual. Not fear, not anger, but curiosity mixed with alertness. This wasn't a fan. This wasn't a challenger. This was something else. Respectful silence filled the hall. No one dared to interrupt. Steven took a slow step forward. Calm. Controlled. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady. "I didn't know you'd be here." Bruce looked at him for a long moment. Then replied softly, "I didn't know you'd be watching." The room held its breath. No one realized it yet, but in that quiet moment, without a single punch thrown, everything was already changing. The space between them felt heavier than distance should allow. Steven Seagal stood grounded, feet planted, shoulders relaxed but ready. He had faced challengers before, men eager to test reputation, hungry for validation. This felt nothing like that. There was no aggression in the air. No bravado. Only focus. Across from him, Bruce Lee remained still, eyes attentive, posture loose. He looked less like someone preparing to act and more like someone observing a lesson already unfolding. No one spoke. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the back raised a phone, hesitated, then lowered it again, unsure if recording this moment would somehow break it. Steven broke the silence first, not with a challenge, but with curiosity. "I've heard a lot about your approach," he said calmly. "Speed. Efficiency. Philosophy." Bruce tilted his head slightly, as if weighing the words. "And I've heard a lot about strength," he replied. "Structure. Control." Their voices were measured. Respectful. Yet beneath every word lay tension, two paths of mastery standing face to face. Steven took a small step, not forward, not back, just enough to test the space. Bruce didn't react. No flinch. No shift. It wasn't arrogance. It was awareness. Around them, the room felt suspended in time. A few people whispered questions to one another. Were they about to spar? Was this a challenge? A test? Bruce looked around briefly, then back at Steven. "People expect conflict," he said softly. "It's what they understand." Steven nodded once. "They expect proof." Bruce smiled faintly, not amused, not mocking. Proof doesn't always come from collision. Steven studied him. He noticed things most people wouldn't. The balance in Bruce's stance, the way his weight seemed evenly distributed yet mobile, the absence of tension in his shoulders. There was no wasted energy. "You don't look like you're here to fight," Steven said. "I'm not," Bruce answered. "I'm here to see." "To see what?" Steven asked. Bruce met his gaze. Whether power needs to announce itself. The words landed heavier than any insult. Steven felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, not doubt, but reflection. His entire career had been built on discipline and authority. He believed in control, in presence. Yet this man, standing before him, carried presence without asserting it. A phone camera quietly clicked on somewhere in the room. Another followed. People sensed something rare, an encounter not driven by ego, but by understanding. Steven crossed his arms loosely. So what do you believe real mastery looks like? Bruce didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, just enough for those watching closely to notice. The movement was subtle, almost insignificant. But it drew the eye. Mastery, Bruce said at last, is being able to choose what you don't need to do. The room went silent again. Steven exhaled slowly. He wasn't being challenged. He was being invited to think, to reassess, to observe from a different angle. For the first time that night, Steven smiled, not confidently, not defiantly, but thoughtfully. Around them, anticipation grew. The audience leaned forward, expecting action, expecting noise, expecting impact. They didn't realize yet that the most powerful exchange had already begun, and it didn't require a single strike. Engagement break. What do you think defines true mastery, raw power or complete control? Comment your thoughts below. As the silence stretched on, one thing became clear to everyone watching. Whatever happened next wouldn't look like a fight. But it would change how they understood strength forever. The silence didn't break, it deepened. What had begun as a quiet exchange now pressed on the room like unseen weight. No one spoke, yet everyone felt it. The kind of tension that doesn't come from anger, but from anticipation. Steven Seagal shifted slightly, rolling his shoulders once, loosening his arms. It wasn't preparation for a strike. It was instinct, his body responding to another master presence. He had trained his entire life to read intention, and right now, intention felt everywhere and nowhere at once. Across from him, Bruce Lee remained relaxed. His breathing was slow, steady, almost meditative. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like passivity. To those who truly understood movement, it looked like total readiness. Steven took a measured step to the side, not away, not closer. A test. A probe. Bruce noticed instantly. But he didn't mirror the movement. He simply turned his torso a fraction, aligning his center without shifting his feet. The adjustment was so subtle that half the room missed it. Steven didn't. You adjust before there's pressure, Steven observed. Bruce nodded slightly. Pressure is late. Awareness is early. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement. Others frowned, unsure what they were witnessing. This wasn't the clash they expected. This was something quieter, and somehow more intense. Steven straightened. You talk about choice, he said. But when a situation demands action, choice disappears. Bruce looked at him calmly. Only if you wait until it's demanded. He stepped forward, just one step. The room collectively inhaled. Steven didn't move, but his focus sharpened. He felt it then, the shift in the air, the tightening of space, the way everyone else faded into the background. This was no longer a conversation for the crowd. This was between two men who understood consequence. Bruce stopped within arm's reach. Still no strike. Still no threat. Instead, Bruce raised one hand, not aggressively, not defensively. Just there. Open. Relaxed. May I? He asked. Steven hesitated, not out of fear, but respect. Then he nodded once. Bruce gestured toward Steven's stance. You are rooted. Solid. Hard to move. Steven didn't disagree. But rooted, Bruce continued, also means committed to one idea of balance. Before Steven could respond, Bruce shifted, just slightly, his foot gliding across the floor without sound. In the same instant, his raised hand moved, not fast, not slow, but precise. Steven felt it. Not a hit. Not a push. A presence. Bruce's hand stopped less than an inch from Steven's chest. The distance was enough to prove something, and close enough to make it undeniable. Steven's instincts fired. In another moment, in another context, he would have reacted. But here, something held him back. Curiosity. Awareness. Understanding. Bruce withdrew his hand. "I didn't need to touch you," he said softly. "Your body already reacted." Steven exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Around them, whispers erupted. Some people leaned forward, others stepped back. A few phones were now openly recording. No one wanted to miss what came next. Steven finally spoke. His voice was calm, but different now, less declarative, more reflective. "You could have struck." "Yes," Bruce replied. "But you didn't." "I didn't need to." That answer lingered in the air. Steven nodded slowly. He understood the implication. Strength that needs to be displayed is strength still seeking validation. He took a step back, not in retreat, but acknowledgement. The crowd sensed it. Something had shifted, not dominance, not victory, but perspective. Bruce lowered his hand and relaxed his posture again, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. "To fight," he said, "is easy. To stop before the fight, that is harder." Steven met his gaze. For the first time that night, there was no tension between them. Only respect, and the unmistakable feeling that the most shocking moment hadn't happened yet. What followed should have felt like resolution. Instead, it felt like confusion. The quiet demonstration, Bruce Lee's hand stopping just short of contact, left the room suspended in disbelief. To some, it looked anticlimactic. To others, it looked unfinished. There was no impact, no audible gasp, no clear winner. And that's where the misunderstanding began. A few people in the crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers spread again, sharper this time. "That's it. I thought there'd be more." "So, did anything actually happen?" Steven Seagal heard the murmurs but didn't react. He was still processing what his body had felt in that instant, how his balance had subtly adjusted without conscious command, how his instincts had moved ahead of thought. Across from him, Bruce Lee had already stepped back, returning to his relaxed stance as if the exchange were complete. To the untrained eye, it looked like Bruce had backed away. Some mistook it for hesitation. One of the younger attendees, clearly impatient, muttered loud enough to be heard, "Is he done already?" Bruce didn't respond. Steven turned his head slightly, not toward the speaker, but toward the room as a whole. He could feel the energy shifting again, not toward insight, but expectation. People wanted spectacle. They wanted confirmation of what they already believed about power. Bruce took a slow breath, then spoke, not loudly, but with a calm clarity that carried. "Most people mistake stillness for emptiness," he said. "They think nothing is happening because nothing is visible." He paused, letting the words settle. But the most important things happen before motion. Steven watched him closely now, seeing something different. This wasn't a demonstration meant to impress. It was a lesson meant to challenge assumptions. Bruce stepped slightly to the side, giving Steven space. The gesture wasn't avoidance, it was invitation. "You thought I was testing you," Bruce continued. "But I was observing how you respond when nothing is demanded of you." Steven raised an eyebrow. "And?" Bruce met his gaze. "You didn't rush. You didn't force control. That tells me more than any strike could." The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence felt unsettled. Some people shifted uncomfortably, realizing they might have missed the point entirely. A man near the back crossed his arms. "So what now?" he asked. "Is this over?" Bruce turned toward the voice, not confrontational, just attentive. "Yes," he said. "And no." That only deepened the confusion. Steven stepped forward again, not aggressively, but deliberately. "They don't understand," he said calmly. Bruce nodded. "They don't have to." Steven considered that for a moment. Then he turned slightly toward the audience. "You're waiting for something obvious," he said. "Something loud." A few heads nodded instinctively. "But real skill," Steven continued, "doesn't announce itself." The room stilled. Bruce watched Steven closely now. For the first time, a faint smile crossed his face, not of triumph, but recognition. Steven turned back to him. "I misread you at first," he admitted. "I thought you were holding back." Bruce shook his head gently. "I was choosing." That distinction landed differently now. Around them, cameras kept recording. Some people were still unsure what they were witnessing. Others were beginning to sense that they were watching two philosophies align, not clash. Bruce took a small step forward again, stopping at a respectful distance. "You carry strength responsibly," he said. "That is rare." Steven inclined his head slightly. "You carry restraint without weakness." The exchange drew a ripple of reaction from the crowd: surprise, curiosity, even admiration. What many still didn't realize was that this moment, this quiet acknowledgement, was the turning point. The story they would later tell wouldn't be about a fight that never happened. It would be about the moment two masters refused to perform for expectation, and in doing so, revealed something far more unsettling than violence. That power, when truly understood, doesn't need permission to be seen. As the room absorbed that truth, one thing became clear. The most shocking part of the encounter was still ahead. The room hadn't settled yet. It couldn't. Too many expectations were colliding, some disappointed, some confused, some quietly intrigued. People had come hoping to witness dominance. Instead, they were watching restraint. And restraint, to many, felt unfinished. That's when it happened. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. But decisively. Bruce Lee took one slow step forward. The sound of his foot against the floor was barely audible, yet it cut through the room like a signal. Conversations stopped. Phones steadied. Every eye locked onto him. He raised his hands, not into a fighting guard, but into a neutral position. Open palms. Relaxed shoulders. "I won't strike," he said calmly. "But I will show." The words alone shifted the atmosphere. Across from him, Steven Seagal straightened slightly. He didn't brace. He didn't harden. He simply became present. His instincts told him something was about to happen, something fast, precise, and intentional. Bruce nodded once, as if asking permission again. Steven nodded back. What followed lasted less than a second. Bruce moved. Not forward, around. It wasn't a rush or a lunge. It was a smooth, circular motion, his body gliding across the space with effortless economy. To the crowd, it looked almost unreal, like motion without momentum. Steven felt it before he saw it. The air shifted. His balance adjusted instinctively. His weight redistributed without conscious command. By the time his mind caught up, Bruce was already past him. No contact. No impact. Yet Steven's posture had changed. Subtly, but unmistakably. Bruce stopped behind him, one hand hovering inches from Steven's shoulder blade. Not touching. Not pressing. Just there. "Freeze," Bruce said quietly. Steven did. The room leaned in. Bruce spoke again, his voice calm but clear. "Right now, if you move, you fall." A murmur rippled through the audience. Steven tested it. Just a fraction of movement. His body resisted. Not from force, but from alignment. He understood immediately. His center of gravity had been redirected without him realizing it. Bruce stepped back. Steven straightened, fully aware now of what had happened. He turned slowly, eyes locked on Bruce, not in shock, not in anger, but in realization. "You didn't touch me," Steven said. Bruce nodded. "I didn't need to." The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier. Sharper. Odd. People exchanged looks, unsure how to react. They had witnessed something undeniable, yet impossible to explain to anyone who wasn't there. Steven took a breath. "Most people think strength is about stopping force," he said thoughtfully. "You redirected intent." Bruce inclined his head. "Force ends things. Intent changes them." A few people clapped instinctively, then stopped, unsure if applause was appropriate. This wasn't a performance. It was a revelation. Steven stepped closer now, not as an opponent, but as a student of the moment. "That movement," he said, "you didn't accelerate." Bruce smiled faintly. "Speed comes from removing what's unnecessary." The phrase echoed through the hall. Phones kept recording, But no one was narrating anymore. No one was whispering. Everyone sensed they were watching something rare, something they wouldn't fully understand until much later. Steven finally spoke again. "If you had wanted to strike..." Bruce raised a hand gently. "Then this wouldn't matter." That stopped him. Because Steven understood the truth in that answer. Violence would have proven nothing. This had proven everything. He stepped back, giving Bruce space, and bowed his head slightly. Not formally. Not ceremonially. But sincerely. The crowd noticed. That single gesture hit harder than any punch could have. Bruce returned the nod, equally understated. In that moment, the room shifted permanently. What began as curiosity had turned into clarity. What some had mistaken for restraint was now revealed as mastery. And everyone present knew one thing for certain. They hadn't just witnessed a demonstration. They had witnessed a lesson that would be talked about long after the footage stopped rolling. The hall didn't erupt. There was no cheering. No shouting. No dramatic reaction the way people expected after witnessing something legendary. Instead, there was silence. A deep, almost reverent silence. People stood frozen, trying to process what they had just seen. Phones remained raised, but no one spoke into them. No commentary. No exaggerated reactions. Everyone sensed that words would only cheapen the moment. At the center of it all stood Steven Seagal. He hadn't moved for several seconds after Bruce stepped back. His eyes were focused, not on Bruce directly, but on the space between them, replaying the movement in his mind. The redirection. The balance shift. The quiet certainty behind it. He finally looked up. Across from him, Bruce Lee stood exactly as before, relaxed, grounded, unassuming. If someone walked into the room at that moment, they might not even guess that anything remarkable had just happened. Steven broke the silence. "I've trained with men who rely on power," he said slowly. "And men who rely on speed. Very few rely on understanding." Bruce listened without interruption. "You didn't overpower me," Steven continued. "You didn't challenge me. You didn't even confront me." Bruce nodded once. "Because none of those things were necessary." Steven exhaled, a quiet breath that carried something heavier than effort, acceptance. Around them, the crowd shifted. Some lowered their phones. Others finally stepped back, as if giving space not just physically, but emotionally. The energy in the room had changed again, this time permanently. One of the senior instructors in attendance cleared his throat, unsure if it was appropriate to speak. "I've seen demonstrations," he said carefully. "But I've never seen restraint used this deliberately." Bruce turned toward him. "Restraint is not absence," he said. "It's choice." Steven nodded in agreement. That was the moment many in the room recognized what they were witnessing. This wasn't about two famous figures sharing a stage. This was about two philosophies meeting and aligning. Steven took a step forward again, stopping at a respectful distance from Bruce. His posture was still confident, still solid, but something had softened. Not weakened. Refined. "You know," Steven said, "people expect confrontation when two reputations stand face to face." Bruce smiled faintly. "Reputation is what people project. Mastery is what remains when projection falls away." Steven chuckled quietly at that, not amused, but appreciative. "If this had turned into a fight," he said, "they would have cheered." "Yes," Bruce replied. "And learned nothing." The words landed cleanly. A few people in the crowd nodded, now fully aware of the lesson unfolding in front of them. This wasn't a victory for one over the other. It was something rarer, a shared understanding that ego had no place here. Steven turned slightly toward the audience. "You came expecting noise," he said calmly. "You got clarity instead." No one disagreed. Bruce stepped forward just enough to stand beside Steven, not opposite him. The subtle shift didn't go unnoticed. It wasn't a challenge anymore. It was alignment. Martial arts, Bruce said, addressing the room now, was never meant to be about proving who is stronger. It was meant to teach when strength is unnecessary. Steven added, and when restraint is the strongest response. That was it. No grand speech. No dramatic exit. Yet the impact was undeniable. The crowd slowly began to respond, not with applause, but with understanding. Some bowed their heads slightly. Others simply stood there, absorbing what they had witnessed. A few instructors exchanged glances that said everything. This moment will be talked about for years. Steven turned back to Bruce one final time. "I appreciate this," he said sincerely. "Not many people would choose to teach instead of dominate." Bruce inclined his head. "Not many would choose to listen." That acknowledgement carried more weight than praise. As people began to quietly disperse, conversation started, not loud, not excited, but thoughtful. Phones were put away. Clips were saved. No one rushed to leave. They knew they had been present for something rare. Two masters. No fight. No ego. Just truth. And as the hall slowly emptied, one thing became clear to everyone who had witnessed it. The story wasn't about what Bruce Lee could do to Steven Seagal. It was about what he chose not to do, and why that choice mattered more than any display of force ever could. The hall eventually emptied. Not all at once. Not loudly. People left in small groups, speaking in lowered voices, as if afraid to break something fragile. No one rushed. No one joked. The usual post-event excitement was missing, replaced by reflection. Phones buzzed that night. Clips circulated quietly at first. No dramatic captions. No slow-motion replays with music. Just raw footage, short, incomplete, almost confusing to anyone who hadn't been there. And yet, it spread. By morning, discussions had begun. Not arguments about who would win in a fight, but questions far more uncomfortable. What did we actually see? Why did it feel so powerful without violence? Is this what mastery really looks like? At the center of every conversation were two names, Steven Seagal and Bruce Lee. Steven watched some of the footage later, alone. The angle was wrong. The timing incomplete. The camera couldn't capture what he had felt, the shift in balance, the clarity, the realization. But he didn't feel the need to correct anyone. He understood something now that didn't require explanation. Bruce, on the other hand, said nothing publicly at all. No interviews. No statements. No attempt to frame the moment. Those who knew him weren't surprised. The lesson wasn't meant to be packaged. It was meant to be discovered. Online, people debated endlessly. Some dismissed it. Nothing happened. Others defended it fiercely. Everything happened. But slowly, a different tone emerged. Instructors shared the clip with students. Coaches paused mid-training to discuss restraint. Even people with no martial arts background felt drawn to it, unsure why. Because it wasn't about fighting. It was about choice. Steven reflected on that night in his own way. In private conversations, he admitted something he'd rarely said before. Not about losing or winning, but about growth. "I didn't feel defeated," he told a close friend. "I felt sharpened." That distinction mattered. He hadn't been overpowered. He hadn't been exposed. He had been reminded. Reminded that true confidence doesn't demand validation. That strength, when mature, becomes quiet. That mastery isn't measured by how much force you can apply, but by how little you need. The footage continued to circulate, gaining millions of views, not because it promised spectacle, but because it refused to deliver it. And in a world addicted to noise, that refusal was shocking. Months later, people still talked about it. Not as the fight that never happened, but as the moment expectations lost. Two men stood face to face. Ego stepped aside. Violence was optional, and declined. And in that choice, something rare was revealed. The strongest person in the room isn't the one who strikes first. It's the one who understands when striking is unnecessary. If you believe true power is shown through control, humility, and restraint, type discipline in the comments, and subscribe for more legendary fictional stories like this one. No punches were thrown that night, yet millions felt the impact.